The air was thick with anticipation as we drove deeper into the heart of the forest. The sun had set, leaving behind a tapestry of purple and dark blue hues that blended seamlessly into the silhouette of towering pines. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something lurked just beyond the reach of our headlights, something that thrummed with an energy I couldn't quite place. This wasn't just any camping trip. There was an eerie sense that this place was alive, watching us. "Come on, Mike. Don't be such a buzzkill." Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to my growing unease. She was sitting in the back seat, her laughter contagious as she tossed a marshmallow at Chris, who was driving. "Seriously, this is going to be epic." Chris grinned, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Nothing beats a night under the stars with friends." I forced a smile, but my heart wasn't in it. I remembered the stories about this forest, the whispers of the locals who warned against venturing too deep. My childhood memories were tainted with images of dark shadows and ethereal whispers dancing just out of sight. Once we parked and unloaded the gear, the cool night air wrapped around us like a shroud. The forest seemed to breathe around us, the rustle of leaves and distant hoots of owls creating an almost symphonic backdrop. I tried to shake off the feeling that gnawed at my insides. "All right, let's set up camp," Jake called out, his voice cheerful as he grabbed the tent poles. He was always the first to jump into action, but even his enthusiasm couldn't lift the heaviness I felt. As we worked, Sarah kept the mood light, cracking jokes and teasing Chris about his clumsy attempts to set up the tent. I found myself drifting further from the group, my gaze locked on the trees that loomed like sentinels. There was something unnerving about the way they stood, tall and silent, as if they were bearing witness to our every move. When the tent was finally up, we gathered around the fire pit. Chris expertly arranged the kindling and logs, and soon a warm glow illuminated our faces. The dancing flames flickered shadows across the trees, creating an illusion of movement amongst the branches. I tried to focus on the fire, but the eeriness of the dark surrounding us continued to seep into my thoughts. "Okay, who's first?" Sarah challenged, her eyes sparkling in the firelight. "Let's get some ghost stories going." "Ugh, not this again," Chris groaned, rolling his eyes. "You know I can't stand those." "Oh, come on. You can't tell me you didn't grow up on spooky tales," she pressed, leaning closer to the fire, her excitement infectious. "I'll tell one," Chris finally relented, although his reluctance was evident. "But it better be short." "Short is good. I like short," Jake chimed in, clearly eager for the tale. As Chris began recounting a local legend about a spirit that haunted the woods, I felt my stomach twist. It was a familiar story, one I'd heard countless times as a kid. I tried to block it out, focusing instead on the flickering flames. "The legend says that if you wander too far into the woods at night, you might encounter the spirit of a miner who went missing years ago," Chris said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say he's searching for his lost friends, while others believe he's looking for revenge on those who disturbed his resting place." "Give me a break," Jake interrupted with a scoff. "It's just a story to scare kids." "Maybe so," Chris countered. "But there are people who swear they've seen him. They say he has glowing eyes and a voice that sounds like the wind through the trees." I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I forced a laugh, trying to dismiss it. "It's just a story, right?" I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Sarah was the only one who seemed enthralled, leaning closer, her eyes wide. "What happens if you see him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some say you're never seen again," Chris replied, smirking as he leaned back, clearly enjoying the attention. I couldn't help but glance around, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond the fire's glow. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves overhead, and for a moment, it felt like the forest was responding to Chris's words. My heart raced, and I was acutely aware of the darkness that enveloped us. All right, enough of that. Let's lighten the mood," Sarah said, clearly trying to shake off the tension. "Chris, how about you tell us your most embarrassing moment instead?" We all burst into laughter, the tension easing slightly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts that plagued me. As the night wore on, the fire crackled, and the laughter faded into the background. I leaned back against a log, staring into the flames, when suddenly, the fire popped loudly, sending a rush of heat toward us. I jumped, instinctively looking around. "Relax, Mike. It's just the fire," Jake said, chuckling at my reaction. But my heart was pounding in my chest, the inexplicable dread returning with full force. "Yeah, just the fire," I echoed, though I felt anything but reassured. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The silence of the forest felt oppressive, each rustle of leaves amplifying the fear that gnawed at me. Sarah, sensing my discomfort, nudged me. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. "Yeah, just, the stories. They get to me sometimes. Don't worry, I'll protect you from any ghosts," she said with a wink, trying to lighten my mood. It was sweet of her, but her words only deepened my sense of foreboding. The conversation shifted back to lighter topics, but I remained distant, caught in my own thoughts. As the fire dwindled, casting long shadows across the ground, I couldn't help but feel an unsettling connection to the stories Chris had shared. The wind picked up again, a cold gust that sent a shiver through me. I glanced toward the tree line, half expecting to see something lurking there. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, and I felt an inexplicable urge to flee. But I didn't want to seem cowardly in front of my friends. "Hey, let's do a group photo," Jake suggested, pulling out his phone and flashing a grin. "This is going to be an epic memory." We gathered around the fire, putting on our best smiles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The camera clicked, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of normalcy. But as the picture was taken, I noticed the trees seemed to loom closer, the shadows stretching out like dark tendrils reaching for us. "Let's do another," Sarah insisted, her enthusiasm infectious. But as we posed again, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing, just the dark, oppressive forest. As the night deepened, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The laughter continued, but I was no longer able to fully engage. My thoughts drifted back to the stories of the lost souls, and I couldn't help but wonder if we had ventured too far into the unknown. "Hey Mike, what's wrong?" Chris asked, his tone laced with concern. "You've been awfully quiet." "Just thinking," I replied, forcing a grin. "About the stories. Don't tell me you believe that stuff." Jake laughed, but his chuckle lacked its usual bravado. I could see the glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes. "Not believe, just, I don't know, feels different out here." Sarah leaned closer, her expression serious. "You mean like something is watching us? Because I kind of feel that too." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I glanced around at the darkened forest. The trees loomed like giants, their branches twisting in the night air. "Let's just enjoy the night," Chris suggested, trying to lighten the mood once more. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we had disturbed something that should have been left undisturbed. As the laughter resumed, I sat back, forcing myself to relax. But deep down, I knew that this night would be different. The forest was alive, and whatever it was waiting for us to let our guard down. And I couldn't help but feel that the stories we had told were just the beginning of something much darker. As night fell over the campsite, the air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures emerging from their slumber. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my gaze drifting toward the dense forest, where shadows danced as the moonlight filtered through the leaves. A lingering unease settled in my chest, an instinctual awareness that something was off. The others were bustling around, unpacking gear and setting up the campfire, their laughter echoing into the stillness of the night. "Come on, Mike. Stop staring into the abyss. We need your help here," Sarah called out, her voice bright and inviting. She was trying to lighten the mood, as she always did, with her infectious enthusiasm. I forced a smile, shaking off the chill that gripped me. Yeah, I'm coming, I replied, moving closer to the group. Chris was already poking at the kindling, a mock-serious look on his face. All right, everyone, let's kick this off right. Who's up for some ghost stories? Chris said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Only if you promise not to bore us to death, Jake retorted, plopping down onto a log, his arms crossed defiantly. Sarah rolled her eyes playfully. Come on, Chris. You've got some creepy ones up your sleeve. Let's hear it. With a dramatic sigh, Chris adjusted his posture and leaned in closer to the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows across his face. Fine, but you asked for it. There's a legend about this forest, you know? They say there's a spirit that haunts these woods, a guardian of lost souls. As he spoke, I felt my stomach twist. I had heard whispers of that very spirit during my childhood, tales woven into the fabric of our town's history. No way, man. That's just a story to scare kids. Jake scoffed, but I remained silent, my heart racing as memories flooded back. Whispers on the playground, warnings from old folks about never wandering alone after dark. Chris continued, his voice deepening for effect. They say the Guardian collects the souls of those who wander off the path, especially those who don't respect the forest. He paused, letting the tension build, while the fire crackled ominously, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Yeah, right. Next you'll tell us that if we don't believe, it'll come for us. Sarah laughed, but I sensed a slight tremor in her voice. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, making me shiver involuntarily. The fire flickered, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw the shadows shift, almost as if they were moving independently of the trees. I glanced around at my friends, their faces illuminated by the firelight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Don't be such a chicken, Mike. You look like you've seen a ghost, Chris teased, breaking me from my thoughts. I forced a chuckle, trying to mask the unease gnawing at me. I'm fine, just a bit chilly, I lied, wrapping my arms around myself. All right then, how about you tell us a story, Mike? Sarah suggested, a playful glint in her eyes. I opened my mouth to respond but thought better of it. I didn't want to share my fears or the recollections of my childhood nightmares. Instead, I chose to focus on Chris's tale. Okay, back to the legend, Chris resumed, his tone dropping lower. They say the Guardian appears when the fire flickers in a certain way, and it feeds on the fear of those who doubt its existence. Laughter erupted from the group, but I noticed that the lightheartedness was beginning to fade as Chris continued. And once it has you in its grasp, it won't let you go until you've paid the price. It's said that the souls it collects are forever lost, trapped in this realm. As the fire crackled, I felt a sudden chill race down my spine. It was as if the very trees were leaning in, eavesdropping on our conversation, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Come on, that's just a story. You really expect us to believe in that crap? Jake said dismissively, but I could see the unease creeping into his bravado. I glanced at Sarah. She was staring into the fire, her expression shifting from amusement to something more serious. What if it is true? She murmured, almost to herself. Don't be ridiculous, Chris laughed, although there was a nervous edge to it. It's just a story, and I refuse to let it scare me. Right, Mike? I opened my mouth to reassure him, but in that moment, the flames shifted again, and I could have sworn I saw a face within the fire, twisted and angry, staring back at us. I blinked, and it vanished, leaving only the flickering glow of the campfire. Did you guys see that? I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. See what? Sarah asked, looking up sharply. The face in the fire. It looked like... My voice trailed off, the words lodged in my throat. Dude, you're just spooked. It's just the shadows playing tricks on you, Jake scoffed. But I could tell he wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. Maybe we should just focus on having fun instead of scaring each other, Sarah suggested, attempting to redirect the energy. Yeah, let's have another round of marshmallows instead. Chris said, clearly eager to change the subject. We resumed our chatter, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was an unspoken tension hanging above us, thick and palpable, like the impending storm that often cloaked the forest. I could feel it in my bones, a sense of foreboding that refused to leave me. As the fire crackled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the depths of the trees. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fire and the laughter of my friends, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the stories I had heard as a child, the warnings, the tales of the Guardian. The night wore on, and as we roasted marshmallows and shared more stories, I began to feel a strange mix of dread and excitement. Sarah's voice cut through the haze of my thoughts. Okay, everyone, I've got a story of my own. It's about the Guardian of Lost Souls. The fire crackled loudly, and the air felt charged. The others shifted, their expressions flickering between amusement and apprehension. I leaned forward, unable to resist the pull of her words. Long ago, before this campsite was established, there were miners who came searching for gold in these woods. She began, her voice low and captivating. But they didn't respect the land, and one by one, they began to disappear. It was said that the Guardian came for them, claiming their souls as punishment for their greed. The atmosphere grew denser, and I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. They say that if you wander off the path at night, you can still hear their cries echoing in the wind. Sarah continued, her eyes wide with intensity. Come on, that's just another ghost story, Jake interrupted, though his voice was less certain now. No, really, you have to listen, she insisted, her voice rising above the skepticism. The Guardian appears when the fire flickers and dances, and it feeds on those who doubt its power. As if on cue, the flames seemed to leap higher, casting erratic shadows that danced in the darkness. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and Chris let out a nervous laugh. Okay, that's enough ghost stories for one night, he said, attempting to shake off the tension. But just then, something shifted in the air, a chill that made the fire crackle even more violently. Did you see that? Sarah whispered, her bravado faltering. Before anyone could respond, the shadows around us deepened, and I felt a presence looming just beyond the tree-line. The laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. Guys, I think we should... I started, but my words were drowned out by a low, rumbling whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of the forest. Lost souls, lost souls. The echo reverberated through the clearing, sending a jolt of terror down my spine. The fire flickered violently, and for a split second, I saw it. A shadow, stretching and contorting, almost resembling a human face with hollow eyes staring right at us. Chris, I heard Sarah gasp, her voice shaky. Guys, this isn't funny, Chris yelled, attempting to mask his fear with bravado. But we were all silent now, frozen in a moment of shared dread as the air grew thick with something more than just fear. A palpable sense of something ancient and powerful awakening around us. Almas perdidas, almas vingativas. The voice echoed again, louder this time, wrapping around us like a cold embrace. We all turned to each other, eyes wide with realization. The legends were not just tales to frighten children. They were a warning. The Guardian was real, and we had unwittingly stirred it from its slumber. In that moment, I knew that the night as night fell, I found myself in the heart of the forest, surrounded by my closest friends, each one of us eager for an adventure that felt as thrilling as it was daunting. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and as I glanced around, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows that danced on the ground, and a shiver ran down my spine. Come on, Mike, don't be such a downer, Sarah exclaimed, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. She had always been the life of the party, the one who could light up even the most somber of moods. It's a perfect night for a ghost story. Chris, you're up. Chris hesitated for a moment, scratching the back of his neck. I don't know, guys. I'm not really into that stuff, he replied, but I could see the excitement flickering in his eyes. The flickering flames of the campfire reflected in his face, creating a warm glow that felt oddly comforting against the chill that wrapped around us. Ah, come on. You've got to have at least one spooky story in that brain of yours, Sarah urged, her enthusiasm infectious. The others joined in, playfully teasing Chris until he relented with a reluctant smile. Fine, fine. But don't blame me if you can't sleep tonight, he said, leaning closer to the fire as he began to weave a tale about the local legend of a spirit that haunted these woods. He spoke of a tragic figure, a miner who had perished in an accident, forever searching for his lost companions. I listened intently, though I couldn't help but feel a knot tightening in my stomach. I remembered snippets of stories my grandmother used to tell me, tales that left me awake at night, afraid of the dark. As Chris's voice filled the air, the flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Laughter erupted among the group, but I remained silent, my thoughts consumed by the memory of those childhood stories. I glanced at Jake, who was leaning back, a smirk playing on his lips, and then at Sarah, who was hanging on to every word Chris said, her eyes wide with wonder. Then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. The fire crackled, and a sudden breeze swept through the clearing, sending a chill down my spine. I could see it in their eyes. Everyone felt it too. A tension settled over us, thick and palpable, as if the very forest was holding its breath. I swallowed hard, my instincts screaming that something was dangerously wrong. Is it just me, or does it feel different? I finally muttered, breaking the uneasy silence that had fallen upon us. Different how? Jake asked, squinting into the darkness beyond the firelight. I don't know. Like we're being watched, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. A nervous chuckle escaped Chris, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Come on, Mike, you're just getting spooked by the story, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. I could tell he was struggling to maintain his bravado. The night was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. Let's focus on something else, Sarah suggested, trying to lighten the mood again. How about we roast some marshmallows? We began to make s'mores, the sweet smell of melting chocolate and toasted marshmallows filling the air, but my mind was still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the stories we had laughed about earlier. The legend of the miner, the lost souls, it all felt too real now. Just as I was starting to regain my composure, the night took a darker turn. We were all laughing about something Chris had said when Jake suddenly stood up, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Hey, where'd the water bottle go? I could have sworn I left it right here. I looked around, scanning the area, but it was as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. Maybe you left it by the stream? I suggested, though I could see the doubt creeping into Jake's eyes. Yeah, I'll go check, he replied, but before he could take a step, a loud crack echoed through the trees, like a branch snapping underfoot. We all froze, turning toward the sound. Jake, Chris called out, his voice shaky. Just a minute, Jake shouted back, though there was a hint of unease in his tone. As the moments ticked by, I felt the tension rise. I'll go with you, I said, standing up. It's too dark to wander alone. Are you sure? Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. Yeah, it's just a quick look. We'll be right back, I assured her, though my own heart was pounding in my chest as I stepped away from the campfire's light. Jake and I pushed through the underbrush, the darkness swallowing us whole as we ventured deeper into the trees. You think he'll be okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the anxiety creeping in. Of course he will, Jake replied, though I could tell he was just as unsettled as I was. He's probably just messing with us. But as we walked further into the darkness, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Chris, I called out, my voice echoing into the void. No response came. After what felt like an eternity of searching, we found nothing. This isn't funny, man. Come on, I shouted, my voice tinged with panic. I glanced around, the shadows seeming to close in on us. Each rustle of leaves made my heart race faster. "Let's go back," Jake said, his face pale. "This isn't right." "Yeah, we should." I agreed, but as we turned to head back, a sense of dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond our sight. We retraced our steps, but the familiar paths felt foreign, the trees looming above us like silent sentinels. When we finally stumbled back into the clearing, my heart sank. "Where's Chris?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. Sarah and the others were standing around the fire, their faces pale and drawn. "He hasn't come back yet," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought he was right behind you." My stomach twisted at the realization. "We have to find him," I said urgently, but as I looked around at my friends, I could see the fear in their eyes. The laughter that had filled the air earlier felt like a distant memory. "Let's split up," Jake suggested, but I shook my head. "No, we need to stay together. It's too dangerous out there," I insisted, my voice firm. But as we waited, the minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an hour. My mind raced with thoughts of the darkness that surrounded us, the stories that echoed in my mind. What if the legends were true? What if the spirit of the miner was real? As if on cue, a chill swept through the clearing, and I shivered, my breath visible in the cool night air. "We need to do something," I said, my voice trembling. I turned to Sarah, who was staring into the darkness with wide eyes. "What if we look for his backpack? He wouldn't go far without it," I suggested, and she nodded, her expression grim. We searched the area, looking for any sign of Chris, but all we found was an eerie silence that seemed to swallow our voices. "This isn't right," I muttered, feeling the weight of despair settle over me. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something lying partially hidden beneath a bush. I rushed over, my heart racing as I pulled it into the light. It was a backpack, Chris's backpack. "Guys, over here," I yelled, and the others rushed to my side. The realization hit us like a punch in the gut. Where was Chris? As I rifled through the bag, my hands trembled. It was filled with his belongings, snacks, a flashlight, and a journal. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat as I read his last entry. It was filled with frantic scribbles about the forest, about the miners, and about the feeling of being watched. "We need to find him," I said, my voice rising in urgency. "He has to be out there." But deep down, I could feel it, the sense that we were no longer alone. The shadows felt alive, shifting and moving as if they were watching us, waiting. Chris's laughter, once so carefree, echoed in my mind, taunting me as the fear began to take hold. "Maybe he just got lost," Jake said, trying to reassure us, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Maybe," I replied, but a part of me knew that something was terribly wrong. As the darkness enveloped us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. The night was still young when we arrived at the campsite, a clear summer sky stretching above us, dotted with stars that twinkled like distant memories. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the sound of crickets chirping. I could feel an unsettling sensation creeping up my spine as I glanced around the dense forest that surrounded us. It was beautiful, yet something about it felt wrong, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. "Come on, guys, this is going to be epic," Sarah exclaimed, her voice breaking through my thoughts. She was trying her best to rally the group, her usual enthusiasm infectious. "Chris, you're up. Tell us a scary story." Chris, who had been lugging the firewood, rolled his eyes, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Really? You want me to scare you all before we even settle in?" He hesitated, glancing at the fire pit, but he knew that Sarah wouldn't let it go easily. "Please, just one story," she insisted, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Fine, fine," he relented, scratching the back of his head. He tossed a few logs into the pit and struck a match, the flames springing to life, crackling and popping as they danced in the cool night air. As the fire flickered, I found myself lost in thought, recalling a story I had heard as a child. It was about the very forest we were in, a dark tale of a spirit that tormented those who dared to trespass. I shivered, not from the chill in the air, but from the memory itself. "All right, here we go," Chris began, settling into a comfortable position next to the fire. "There's a legend about a spirit that roams these woods. They say it's the guardian of lost souls, a being that preys on those who venture too deep, drawing them into the shadows." The others chuckled, dismissing his words with playful banter, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. As Chris spoke, the flames crackled ominously, framing his face in flickering shadows, and I couldn't help but feel that he was stirring something that should have remained undisturbed. "Legend has it," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that the Guardian was once a miner who lost his life in a tragic accident. Now he roams the forest, searching for souls to take in his place." "Sounds like a classic campfire tale," Jake scoffed, tossing a twig into the fire. "You really think we should be scared? I think we should just enjoy the night," Mike said, attempting to lighten the mood. Yet, even as he spoke, his gaze lingered on the dark edges of the forest, his brow furrowed in thought. The atmosphere shifted then, thickening with tension. The fire crackled louder as a sudden breeze swept through, carrying with it a coldness that made everyone shift uncomfortably. I could feel it, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as though we were being watched. "Did you guys feel that?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly, her bravado faltering. "What? The wind?" Chris replied, but even he couldn't mask the unease creeping into his tone. I remained silent, the words of the legend echoing in my mind. It was just a story, I told myself, but the weight of the night pressed down on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As the evening wore on, Sarah, determined to keep the spirit of the night alive, stood up and declared, "Okay, enough of Chris's spooky tales. I have one of my own." Her voice was strong, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. The air grew dense as she began to weave her tale about the guardian of lost souls. We all leaned in, captivated by her words, the warmth of the fire contrasting sharply with the chill that seemed to envelop us. And then it happened. As she spoke, the flames danced erratically, twisting into shapes that seemed to mimic her words. A shadow formed in the flickering light, almost resembling a face, and I held my breath. "Guys, look!" I pointed, my voice barely a whisper. "What? It's just the fire." Chris laughed nervously, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The others were silent, their gazes fixed on the strange shadow that loomed just beyond the fire's reach. "Almas perdidas, almas vingativas," a voice echoed, deep and haunting, sending chills coursing through me. The moment felt surreal, as if we had crossed a threshold from the mundane into something otherworldly. "What was that?" Jake asked, his bravado evaporating into thin air. "It's just the wind," Chris repeated, but his voice was shaky this time. The air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken truth that none of us wanted to confront. The realization settled in my gut like a stone. The legend wasn't just a story. The Guardian was real, and we had awakened it. "What do we do?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, panic seeping into her words. I wanted to speak, to tell them what I had remembered from my childhood, but the words caught in my throat. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could see the fear reflected in each of their faces. "Let's just calm down," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're just being paranoid. It's probably just our imagination." But deep inside, I knew better. As the fire crackled and the shadows shifted around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was waiting for us just beyond the light. "Let's stick together," I suggested, hoping to strengthen our resolve. But as we huddled closer to the fire, I couldn't help but feel that we were merely delaying the inevitable. The forest loomed around us, dark and foreboding, ready to consume the unwary. As Sarah attempted to regain her composure, I could see her glancing nervously into the darkness, her earlier bravery now replaced by uncertainty. "We can't let this get to us," she declared, her voice firm yet trembling at the edges. "We're just here to have fun, right?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if the stories were true? What if the Guardian wasn't just a figment of our imagination? Then, without warning, the night took a sharp turn. A sudden scream pierced the air, sending shockwaves through our group. Jake had vanished, swallowed by the shadows without a trace. "Jake!" We all shouted in unison, panic rising like bile in my throat. "Where did he go?" Chris yelled, his voice rising in pitch as he looked around frantically. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "We need to search for him." The forest, once a beautiful backdrop to our summer adventure, had transformed into a maze of terror. As we called out for Jake, I felt the weight of something lurking behind us, watching, waiting. "Let's split up," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling but determined. "We can cover more ground that way." I hesitated, feeling a deep sense of foreboding. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Do you have a better one?" She shot back, her eyes ablaze with fear and desperation. "Okay, just be careful," I agreed reluctantly. As we scattered into the darkness, my heart raced. The trees closed in around me, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands. I could hear the whispers of the forest, echoing the warnings of my childhood. The stories were more than just tales. They were a warning. "Jake!" I called, my voice barely breaking the silence. But the only response was the rustling of leaves, a sound that sent my heart into my throat. It felt like hours as I searched, the shadows growing longer and heavier. And just when I was about to lose hope, I stumbled upon a backpack lying on the ground, half buried in leaves. "Jake!" I shouted again, my voice rising in panic. My hands trembling, I unzipped the bag and froze. Inside, I found an old, tattered diary, its pages yellowed with age. "Sarah!" I called, my voice echoing through the trees. "I found something." Moments later, she appeared, her face pale. "What is it?" "A diary," I said, my hands shaking as I pulled it from the bag. "It belonged to one of the miners who disappeared years ago." "Wait, what?" she said, her eyes widening. "What does it say?" I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I began to read. The words were haunting, revealing secrets of the mountain and the souls trapped within it. Each line sent chills down my spine as I felt the weight of the past pressing down on us. "Mike, this is bad," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "We need to get back to the others." But as we turned to leave, the forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows deepening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The night was serene, the kind that wraps you in a blanket of comfort, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The stars twinkled overhead, bright against the deep navy sky, but their beauty felt distant, almost mocking. As we arrived at the campsite, the laughter and chatter of my friends faded into the background, and all I could hear was the rustling of leaves in the wind. I glanced around, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite articulate. "Come on, Mike, don't tell me you're already scared," Sarah teased, nudging me playfully as she unpacked the gear. Her attempt to lighten the mood was noble, but it didn't reach me. I simply smiled, though I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach. "Let's get the fire going. It'll keep the creepy crawlies away," Chris chimed in, ever the skeptic. He was the kind of guy who rolled his eyes at ghost stories, convinced they were merely figments of overactive imaginations. As the flames flickered to life, I settled on a log, trying to shake off the unease enveloping me. I watched as Chris reluctantly agreed to tell a ghost story, clearly not wanting to back down from Sarah's challenge. He cleared his throat, glancing at the shadows creeping at the edges of our camp. All right, gather around, everyone. Let me tell you about the spirit that roams these woods." Chris began, his voice lowering as if the trees themselves were listening. "Please spare us the theatrics. We all know it's just a bunch of nonsense," Jake interjected, his bravado on full display. The others laughed, but I remained silent, recalling the tales I'd heard as a child, stories that had kept me awake at night, clutching my blanket tightly. Chris leaned closer to the fire, and the flames danced, illuminating his face in a flickering glow. Legend has it that a miner went missing in these woods decades ago. They say he never left, that his spirit is still here, searching for something or someone. Sounds like a bad horror movie, Jake laughed, but the laughter felt forced. I could see the unease settle into his eyes, just as it had in mine. As Chris continued, the fire crackled ominously, and a chill ran through the air, causing the hair on the back of my neck to stand up. They call him the Guardian of Lost Souls. He's said to torment those who dare to enter his territory. A gust of wind swept through the campsite, making me shiver despite the warmth of the fire. I caught Sarah's eye. She looked as uneasy as I felt. "Oh, come on, Chris. You're not seriously trying to scare us, are you?" she said, her voice a mixture of bravado and apprehension. But Chris only shrugged. "It's just a story, but what if it's true?" The fire crackled more violently, sending sparks into the air. I could almost hear the whispers of the trees around us, taunting us, reminding us of the danger that lurked in the dark. "Mike, what do you think?" Sarah asked, pulling me from my thoughts. I think it's just a story," I replied quickly, though my voice wavered. Deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure. "Yeah, see? Even Mike agrees," Chris said, but I noticed the tremor in his voice, the slight tightening of his jaw. The night wore on, and as Chris's story came to a close, I felt a heaviness settle between us. "Let's go for a walk," I suggested, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere that had formed. "Are you crazy?" Jake scoffed. "This isn't the time for a stroll through the woods. Just a quick one. I need some air," I insisted, hoping that stepping away from the group would ease my mind. Reluctantly, Sarah joined me. "I'll come with you. I don't like the idea of you wandering off alone," she said, feigning a casual tone. As we stepped into the darkness, the sounds of the camp faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees. I could feel the weight of the stillness around us, a palpable tension that made my skin prickle. "Do you really think there's something out here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to keep my tone light, "but I can't shake this feeling that we're being watched." "Come on, that's just the ghost stories getting to you. There's nothing to worry about," she said, though I could hear the slight tremor in her voice. We wandered further from the camp, the moonlight casting eerie shadows that danced between the trees. Suddenly, a rustling sound made us both stop in our tracks. I turned to Sarah, and I could see her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she breathed, her voice shaking. I don't know." Before we could react, a figure darted past us, disappearing into the underbrush. My heart raced as I instinctively grabbed Sarah's hand. "Did you see that?" I stammered. "Yes. What was that?" she replied, her voice rising in panic. "Let's go back," I urged, pulling her along. The unease had morphed into pure terror. We hurried back to the warmth of the fire, where our friends were still seated, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "Where have you two been?" Chris asked, concern etched on his face. "Just exploring," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my heart was still pounding. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked suddenly, his expression serious. "I swear I heard something out there. Probably just a deer," Chris said dismissively, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The air felt thick with apprehension, and as we sat back down, the shadows seemed to loom closer, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. As the night deepened, my mind raced with thoughts of the ghost stories. What if there was some truth to them? What if we weren't alone out here? "Let's lighten the mood," Sarah suggested, attempting to rally us back to laughter. "How about I tell a story?" The others exchanged glances, but eventually, they nodded. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "All right, gather around. Let me tell you about the Guardian of Lost Souls." As she recounted the tale, a chill settled over us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had awakened something. The fire crackled, and I watched as the flames danced unnaturally, casting eerie shadows that seemed to contort into shapes. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air grew colder, and Sarah's voice faltered as she spoke of the Guardian. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, and I knew that whatever we had summoned, it was not just a story anymore. Almas perdidas, almas vingativas, a voice echoed, chilling me to the bone. I froze, eyes wide. Did you hear that? Everyone went silent, and the weight of the realization hit us. The legends, the warnings, they were all too real. As the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the trees, I sank deeper into my thoughts. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the very air around us was charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. Sarah sat across from me, her eyes wide with a mixture of determination and fear as she recounted her version of the legend. But all I could think about was the diary we had found earlier, tucked away in Jake's abandoned backpack, the one that had belonged to a miner who had fallen victim to the very spirits we were now joking about. Mike, are you even listening? Sarah's voice cut through my reverie, snapping me back to the present. Yeah, I am, I replied, though my tone lacked conviction. It's just, I can't shake this feeling that there's something more to this place. Come on. You're not seriously buying into that old ghost story, are you? Chris chimed in, attempting to lighten the mood with a chuckle, but his laughter felt forced, as if he, too, sensed the weight of the night. No, but... I hesitated, glancing toward the dark tree-line that framed our campsite. The shadows seemed to writhe, almost as if they were alive. We found that diary, right? There has to be some truth to it. Maybe it's just a bunch of old folklore, Chris said dismissively. People love to exaggerate. Or maybe it's a warning. I shot back, my voice rising slightly. What if those stories are meant to keep people away from here for a reason? I think you're just spooking yourself, Sarah said, though her voice lacked its usual bravado. We're here to have fun, remember? I nodded, but my heart was racing. I could still picture the pages of the diary, worn and yellowed, with frantic scribbles detailing the miners' fears and the horrors they faced. There was a passage about a ritual, I finally said, my voice low. A way to free the lost souls. They mentioned needing an offering. Something alive. What are you suggesting, Mike? Chris asked, his brows knitted together in confusion. I don't know, I admitted, my pulse quickening. I just feel like we need to do something before it's too late. Do what? Sarah asked, her tone shifting from playful to serious. We're not going to start dabbling in some dark ritual, are we? Maybe we should, I said, my conviction growing stronger. If there's a chance it could help us, we owe it to Jake and to ourselves. A silence settled over the group, thick with the unsaid. I could see the flickering firelight reflecting off Sarah's eyes, dancing between fear and intrigue. I don't know, Mike. What if we're just making it worse? Worse than losing Jake? I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. We need to act. We can't just sit here and hope everything will be fine. All right, so what do we need? Chris asked, his voice firm despite his earlier skepticism. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. According to the diary, we need specific items, things that were important to the miners. There might be remnants in the cave Chris found. Great. So we're going back to that cave? Sarah asked, her voice wavering. You're out of your mind. Look, if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. We can't just wander blindly into the darkness. Fine, but I'm not going alone, Sarah said, crossing her arms defiantly. I'll go with you, Mike, but if anything feels off, we're turning back. I'll go too, Chris added, his bravado returning. I owe it to Jake. We all do. I nodded, grateful for their support, even if it felt shaky at best. We'll go at first light. Everyone needs to rest and be ready. The night dragged on, filled with restless whispers and glances toward the encroaching shadows. I lay awake, staring up at the stars, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. My mind replayed the entries from the diary, the lines about the souls trapped in the forest, angry and vengeful. I could almost hear their cries echoing in the back of my mind. As dawn broke, the world outside felt different. The shadows seemed to retreat, but the air was colder, biting against my skin. I could sense it. Something was waiting, lurking just beyond the trees. "Are we really going through with this?" Sarah asked as we prepared, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to," I replied, my own resolve wavering as I glanced at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. "For Jake." We set out, the forest around us eerily silent as if holding its breath. The path was overgrown, twisted roots snaking across our feet. Every crack of a branch felt amplified, sending jolts of adrenaline through my body. "Do you think we'll find anything?" Chris asked, his voice breaking the tension. "I hope so," I said, but the truth was I felt a growing anxiety. What if we found something? What if we didn't? As we approached the cave, the air grew heavy, thick with an unsettling energy. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat feeling like a countdown. "Stay close," I instructed, stepping into the mouth of the cave. The darkness swallowed us whole, and I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. The walls glistened with moisture, and I could hear the soft drip of water echoing around us. "Look," Chris said, pointing to a pile of debris in the corner. "There's something over there." As we moved closer, I could make out the shapes: broken tools, rusted helmets, and scraps of clothing. "These must belong to the miners," I breathed, a chill running down my spine. "Let's see if there's anything useful," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached down, picking up a battered miner's lantern. "This could help us." As she held it up, the light flickered to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "What about that?" I pointed to a small wooden box partially buried under some rocks. Chris knelt down and pried it open. Inside lay a collection of trinkets, small carved figures, each one unique. "These were offerings," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. "They were trying to appease something." "Do you think it's enough?" I asked, feeling a mix of hope and dread. "Maybe," Chris replied, examining the items closely. "But we still need the right ingredients. The diary mentioned something about herbs and salt." "Let's keep looking," I urged, scanning the cave for any sign of what we needed. My heart raced. The deeper we went, the more I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching us. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cave, sending a shock of fear through me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "But we need to hurry." We searched frantically, my hands shaking as I rifled through the remnants of the past. My heart raced as I found a small pouch filled with dried herbs, just as the diary had described. "I found something," I shouted, holding it up like a trophy. "Great! Now, what about salt?" Chris asked, glancing nervously around the cave. "Let's check the other side," I suggested, my voice tense. We moved cautiously, the growl echoing in the distance, growing closer. "Over there," Sarah pointed to a small pile of rocks. "I think I see a bag." I rushed over, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached for the bag, a shadow darted past me, quick as lightning. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. "Did you see that?" I gasped, turning to Chris and Sarah, who looked equally terrified. "Yeah," Chris whispered, backing away. "We need to get out of here, now." But before we could move, the growl erupted again, this time closer, more menacing. The darkness around us thickened, and I felt a primal instinct kick in. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing the bag and bolting toward the cave entrance. We raced through the narrow passage, the shadows closing in behind us. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed past the fear, adrenaline fueling my every step. As we burst into the daylight, I stumbled, nearly losing my balance. "What the hell was that?" Sarah panted, her face pale. "I don't know," I admitted, my own fear reflected in her eyes. But we need to prepare for whatever it is. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. The forest felt eerily quiet, as if it too was holding its breath in anticipation. I could still feel the weight of the cave pressing down on me, the dark presence lurking just beyond the trees. "Let's get back to the camp," Chris urged, his voice shaky. "We need to figure out how to do this ritual." As we made our way back, I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. The closer we got to the camp, the night had grown heavy, wrapped in an unsettling silence, as I sat around the flickering campfire with my friends. The shadows danced against the trees, creating a backdrop that seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as we exchanged nervous glances, our earlier bravado slipping away like smoke into the night. Chris's face was pale, reflecting the fear that had settled into our hearts after Jake's sudden disappearance. I had been trying to focus on the crackling fire, the way the flames licked at the logs, but my mind was elsewhere, caught in a whirlwind of anxiety and unspoken fears. The words of the local legend Chris had recounted still echoed in my mind. Lost souls, vengeful spirits. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Guys, we need to talk about what just happened," Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he gestured towards the surrounding darkness. I think we need to figure out what we're dealing with. Are you seriously buying into this?" Sarah scoffed, trying to mask her own fear with bravado. "It's just a story. We can't let this get to us." "But what if it's not just a story?" Chris pressed, his eyes darting nervously around the campsite. "Jake just vanished. He wouldn't just leave us. Not like this." I could see Sarah's confidence wavering, her usual bravado slipping. "You're right, it's strange, but we can't let fear control us. We have to stick together and find him. We can't let whatever is out there." "Out there," I interrupted, pointing towards the looming trees that seemed to close in on us. "What if it's already here? What if whatever took Jake is watching us right now?" The group fell silent, the weight of my words settling heavily among us. I could see the fear creeping into their eyes, the realization that we were not just dealing with a prank or a simple disappearance. Something was very wrong, and we were in over our heads. "Listen," I said, trying to regain control of the situation. "We can't split up. We need to stay together and search as a group. If we stick together, we'll have a better chance of finding Jake." "Fine," Chris replied, his voice shaky but resolute. "But we need to be careful. I found something in the cave, something that might help us understand what's happening." "A cave?" Sarah asked incredulously. "You went exploring without us? What were you thinking?" "I didn't want to sit around waiting for something to happen," Chris defended himself. "I thought I might find a clue or something, but when I was in there, I felt something, like I wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" I leaned in closer, curiosity peeking through my fear. There were remains, old mining equipment, and I don't know. It felt like a warning, Chris stammered, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "I think it's connected to the legend. The miners, they didn't just disappear. They were taken." Sarah scoffed again, trying to maintain her composure. "This is ridiculous. We're letting this story get to our heads. We need to focus on finding Jake." "Sarah, you need to listen," I said, my voice rising slightly with urgency. "Chris found something. We can't just ignore it. If there's even a chance it can help us, we have to take it seriously." "I'm not saying we shouldn't take it seriously," she snapped back, her eyes blazing. "But I refuse to believe that some ghost is responsible for all of this. We need to think logically. Logic isn't going to save us if there really is something out there," Chris countered, his voice low and tense. "We need to confront this head-on." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Sarah challenged. "We need to find that cave," I suggested, feeling a sense of determination rising within me. If Chris is right, there might be something there that can help us find Jake or understand what happened to him. Chris nodded, his expression serious. "I can show you where it is, but we have to be careful. I felt like I was being watched. It was as if the darkness was alive. Fine, Sarah relented, her bravado fading. But we're sticking together. No one goes off on their own. As we gathered our gear, a gust of wind swept through the campsite, sending a shiver down my spine. The trees rustled ominously, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Let's hurry, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to find Jake and get to the cave. The walk through the forest was tense. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy above, casting eerie shadows that danced around us. I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath our feet and the faint rustle of nocturnal creatures, but it was the silence that unnerved me the most. Do you hear that? Chris whispered suddenly, stopping in his tracks. Hear what? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Listen, he urged, straining his ears. I focused, and there it was, a low, distant whispering that seemed to float through the trees, wrapping around us like a cold fog. Is that voices? I asked, my heart racing. Maybe it's Jake, Chris exclaimed, glancing around frantically. Or maybe it's something worse, I replied, my stomach churning. Let's keep moving, Sarah urged, her voice trembling slightly. We can't waste any time. As we continued deeper into the woods, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a haunting melody. I felt a chill creep up my spine, an instinctual urge to turn back. Guys, I don't like this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What if we're walking into a trap? We're not turning back, Chris asserted, his determination shining through his fear. We have to find Jake. We owe it to him, right? I nodded, trying to suppress my own fear. Let's keep going. When we finally reached the cave, it loomed before us like a gaping mouth, dark and foreboding. The entrance was partially hidden by overgrown foliage, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me as we stepped inside. The darkness enveloped us, and I fumbled for my flashlight, flicking it on to pierce through the gloom. The beam illuminated the damp stone walls, revealing the remnants of mining equipment and debris scattered across the ground. Holy crap, Chris breathed, stepping further into the cave. This place is massive. Yeah, but where do we start? Sarah asked, her voice echoing eerily off the walls. Let's look for anything that might give us clues about the miners, I suggested, scanning the area for anything unusual. As we rummaged through the debris, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers seemed to grow more distinct, swirling around us, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Guys, did you hear that? Chris suddenly said, his face pale. Hear what? I asked, my heart racing. It sounded like someone was crying, he replied, his voice trembling. Stop messing around, Chris, Sarah snapped, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I'm serious, he insisted, his eyes wide with fear. I swear I heard someone. Let's just keep looking, I urged, trying to maintain control of the situation. But as we continued to search, I felt a growing sense of unease. The shadows seemed to twist and shift around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a small, tattered journal half buried beneath some rocks. I picked it up, brushing away the dirt to reveal the faded cover. Guys, look at this, I called out, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. What is it? Chris asked, stepping closer. It's a journal, I said, flipping it open. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, detailing the miners' experiences in the cave, their fears, and mentions of something lurking in the darkness. This is it, I said, excitement mingling with fear. This could explain everything. What does it say? Sarah asked, peering over my shoulder. There are mentions of whispers of voices calling to them. They thought they were just losing their minds, but I paused, my throat tightening. But there's something here, something they didn't understand. Keep reading, Chris urged, his voice barely a whisper. I continued to read, my voice trembling as I relayed the words on the page. They talk about a presence, something that feeds off fear. They tried to escape, but it was too late. The darkness claimed them. As I read, the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. I could feel the panic rising within me, the weight of the miners' despair pressing down like a heavy shroud. "We need to get out of here," I said. My voice shaking the air was thick with tension as the full moon cast an eerie glow over the campsite. Shadows danced around the flickering fire, illuminating the faces of my friends, each reflecting a mixture of dread and determination. My heart raced as I contemplated the gravity of our situation. We were trapped in a nightmare, and I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a heavy stone. "Mike, are you sure about this?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly, her eyes wide with fear. She was standing a few steps away from me, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she could somehow shield her heart from the terror that surrounded us. "You don't have to do this." I glanced at her, my mind racing. I had never been one for rash decisions, especially not in moments like these. But as I looked at Sarah, I could see the fear etched on her face. It mirrored my own, but it was something deeper. It was the fear of the unknown, of the darkness that lurked beyond the firelight. I could feel the weight of our past creeping in, the secrets that each of us harbored, threatening to unravel the fragile bond we had left. "I have to," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "If this is what it takes to save you all, then it's worth it." "Don't say that," Chris interjected, his voice rising in panic. "You can't just offer yourself up like that. It's insane." He was pacing, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I could see the conflict on his face, the battle between reason and fear. "We can find another way. We can figure this out together." Looking away from Chris, I noticed the shadows growing longer, creeping closer to the edge of our campfire. They felt alive, pulsating with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "We've tried everything else. The shadow, the guardian. It won't stop until it has what it wants. Maybe I can be the key to ending this." "Stop it, Mike," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "You're not thinking straight. We can't just sacrifice someone. We're friends, we're supposed to stick together." She took a step toward me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Please, don't do this." But deep down, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The moment I had stumbled across the diary, reading about the souls trapped in the mountain, it had all clicked into place. The weight of my family's past, the guilt that gnawed at my insides, it was all connected. I could feel the Guardian's presence looming, hungry for retribution, and I knew I had to face it head on. "I can't let you all suffer because of my family's mistakes," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "The Guardian wants vengeance, and if I'm the offering it needs, then maybe, just maybe, it will release you all." "Mike!" Chris shouted, his voice a mix of desperation and anger. "You're not responsible for what happened. You can't just take the blame for something that isn't yours." I turned to him, frustration boiling inside me. "You don't understand. My family was involved in the tragedy of the miners. The deaths, the lost souls, they haunt me too. I can't run from this anymore. Even if that's true, it doesn't mean you should sacrifice yourself." Sarah's voice was firm now, her determination shining through her fear. "We're going to find another way. I won't let you do this." The shadows flickered, and I could almost hear them whispering, taunting us. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions, but looking at my friends, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. We were all caught in this twisted web, and I was convinced I was the only one who could cut it. "Listen," I said, my voice softer now. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't let you bear this burden. If I can end the cycle of pain, I will." There was a moment of silence, the kind that felt heavy and suffocating. Sarah's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to read my thoughts. "You really believe this will work, don't you?" "I have to believe it will," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "For all of us." Chris shook his head, his expression torn. "We're not in a horror movie, Mike. This isn't how it's supposed to go. Don't give in to the fear." But it was too late. The fear had already seeped into my bones, taking root in my heart. The shadows were closing in, and I could feel the Guardian's presence pressing down on me like a vice. It was now or never. As I stepped closer to the fire, the heat kissed my skin, a stark contrast to the frigid air surrounding us. The flames flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced around us like restless spirits. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had left. "Mike!" Sarah's voice was a whisper, filled with an urgency that tugged at my heartstrings. "Please just think about this. If you do this, you might not come back. We might lose you forever." "I can't think about that," I said, my resolve hardening. "If I don't do this, we could all lose everything. I can't let that happen." The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the clearing with a ghostly light. My friends watched me with a mix of horror and disbelief, and I could feel the weight of their gazes like chains binding me to the ground. But I wouldn't be swayed. The shadows were restless, and I could sense the Guardian's impatience growing. "Just know that I love you all," I said finally, my voice breaking as I turned my back to them. "I hope you can forgive me." "Mike, don't," Chris shouted, desperation lacing his tone. "We can find another way. We don't have to do this." But I was already moving, stepping into the darkness where the shadows writhed and twisted. The air felt charged with energy, vibrating with a power I couldn't comprehend. I could hear the whispers of the lost souls echoing through the trees, urging me forward. I walked deeper into the night, my heart pounding like a war drum. As I stood on the edge of the clearing, I could feel the Guardian's presence looming closer, a palpable force that sent chills down my spine. I closed my eyes, focusing on the warmth of the fire behind me, the memories of laughter and friendship flooding my mind. I had to believe there was a way out of this, a way to appease the darkness without losing myself completely. "Guardian of the forest," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. "I stand before you, willing to offer myself in exchange for the souls you seek. I am here to make amends for the sins of my family." The shadows coalesced, forming a figure that loomed larger than life. I could feel its energy swirling around me, a tempest of rage and sorrow. "Alone, you are nothing?" it whispered, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Your offering will not be enough. The blood of the guilty must be spilled." I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "I will offer my life, my essence, to free the lost souls. Take me and let my friends go." The Guardian hesitated, the shadows flickering as if considering my words. I could feel the weight of its gaze upon me, piercing through the darkness of my soul. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain," it replied, its voice echoing through the trees. "But know this, the truth must be spoken, or it will consume you." I swallowed hard, the weight of its words settling over me like a shroud. I thought of the secrets I had carried, the guilt that had haunted me for so long. "Mike!" Sarah's voice sliced through the air, pulling me back. "Don't do this. We can find another way." But the shadows were already closing in, the Guardian's presence overwhelming. I could feel the energy crackling in the air around me, and I knew I had to act fast. "I will face the truth," I declared, my voice growing stronger. "I will confront the sins of my family, and I will set the lost souls free." The air grew thick with anticipation, and I could feel the Guardian's fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Then speak your truth," it commanded, its voice echoing through the clearing. "Reveal the secrets that bind you." With a deep breath, I began to speak, the words tumbling from my lips like a floodgate opening. "My family. They were responsible for the tragedy that befell the miners. They took their lives, their futures, and trapped their souls in this place. I have carried that burden for too long, haunted by the past." As I spoke, the shadows writhed around me, pulsing with energy. I could feel the Guardian's presence shifting, the anger giving way to something deeper, something almost sorrowful. "You speak of guilt, but do you understand the weight of it?" it asked, its voice softer now, almost mournful. "I do," I replied, my heart racing. "I've lived with it every day. I never wanted this. I never wanted any of it, but I can't change the past. All I can do is the air was thick with tension as we gathered around the dying embers of the fire. Moonlight bathed the clearing in a silvery glow, casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees. My heart raced as I looked at the faces of my friends. Sarah, Chris, and the others, each one wearing an expression of fear and uncertainty. The reality of our situation had finally settled in, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my shoulders. "We have to do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the tattered diary we had found. "If there's any chance of saving ourselves, we need to perform the ritual." Chris shook his head, his face pale. "You don't even know if it works. What if it makes things worse?" His voice cracked, revealing the panic beneath his bravado. "Worse than what?" "Being hunted by a vengeful spirit." I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I can't just sit here and wait for it to pick us off one by one." Sarah stepped forward, her brow furrowed with thought. "But we need to make sure we have everything we need. The diary mentions specific ingredients, and we can't afford to mess this up." She glanced at me, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "What if we need something from one of us? Something more personal?" The suggestion hung in the air like a lead weight, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "No," I said firmly. "We can't sacrifice anyone. We need to find another way." Chris ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the shadows lurking just beyond the firelight. "What if we don't have a choice? What if one of us has to be the offering?" "Stop it, Chris," Sarah snapped, her voice rising in anger. "We can't start talking like that. We have to work together." "Work together?" I scoffed. "We've been falling apart since Jake disappeared. How can we trust each other when we're all scared out of our minds?" "Enough!" Sarah shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. "We don't have time to argue. We need to figure this out now, before it's too late." I could see the desperation in her eyes, and it twisted my heart. She had always been the brave one, the one to lead us into the unknown without hesitation. But now, I sensed her fear creeping in, cracking her facade. "Let's focus on the ritual," I suggested, trying to rein in my emotions. "What exactly do we need?" "I still have the list from the diary," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and held it up. "We need herbs from the forest, a vial of blood, and a living soul." The last words hung heavily in the air, and I felt the breath hitch in my throat. "A living soul?" Chris's face paled further. "That can't be right. We can't just offer someone up. We don't know what it means," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling. "There has to be another way. Something we can do that doesn't involve sacrificing anyone." I closed my eyes, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. What if we can find a way to appease the spirit without losing anyone? Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering my words. "We could try to communicate with it first. Maybe it's not too late to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Chris scoffed. "What do you want to do? Ask it for a cup of coffee while it's trying to eat us?" "Stop being a jerk, Chris," Sarah snapped back. "This is serious. If we can find out what the spirit wants, maybe we can find a way to satisfy it without any sacrifices." A tense silence settled over the group, and I could feel the unease creeping back. The shadows seemed to shift, drawing closer, and my heart raced again. "Let's gather the herbs first," I suggested, trying to maintain some semblance of order. "We can search the perimeter of the campsite. Maybe we can find something useful." Chris shrugged, looking less than convinced. "Fine, but I'm not going anywhere alone. I'll go with you." "Great," I said, relieved that he was willing to come along. I didn't want to face the darkness alone. "Sarah, stay here and keep an eye out. If anything happens, shout." "Don't worry, I will," she said, her voice steadier now. As Chris and I moved into the trees, the sounds of the forest enveloped us. The rustle of leaves and distant animal calls only heightened my anxiety. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Do you really think we'll find anything?" Chris asked, his voice low. "I hope so," I replied, my eyes scanning the ground for anything that resembled the herbs mentioned in the diary. "We need to do something, or we're all going to end up like Jake." "Let's not talk about Jake," Chris muttered. "It's too creepy." We walked in silence for a while, the moonlight filtering through the leaves above us. I could feel the weight of Chris's fear beside me, and it mirrored my own. "Do you think the stories are real?" I asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Chris hesitated. "I don't know. I always thought they were just that, stories. But now," he trailed off, glancing nervously at the dark expanse of trees around us. "It feels too real." I nodded, my stomach twisting with unease. "I can't shake this feeling that we're being watched, like something is lurking just out of sight." Chris swallowed hard, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Let's just find those herbs and get back to the camp as quickly as possible." As we moved deeper into the woods, a rustle nearby made us both freeze. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. "Did you hear that?" Chris whispered, his voice quivering. "Yeah," I replied, my pulse racing. "I don't like this." Suddenly, a figure darted between the trees, and we both jumped. "What was that?" Chris gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "I don't know. Let's get out of here," I urged, and we turned to head back toward the campsite. But the shadows seemed to close in around us, swallowing the light. We stumbled through the underbrush, the fear propelling us forward until we finally burst into the clearing. "Sarah," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "Where are you?" She appeared from behind a tree, her face pale and eyes wide. "What happened?" "I heard something. We need to move," I said urgently. "We saw something in the woods, something watching us." Chris looked back, his face twisted in fear. "It felt like it was right behind us." "Calm down, both of you," Sarah said, her voice steadying as she took charge. "Let's focus on gathering the herbs. We can't waste any more time." I nodded, grateful for her strength. Together, we searched the area, gathering whatever we could find that resembled the herbs mentioned in the diary. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we had collected a small bundle of leaves and roots. I clutched them tightly, the hope of a solution flickering dimly in my chest. "Now what?" Chris asked, glancing nervously at the surrounding woods. "Now we need to prepare for the ritual," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We'll need to set everything up near the fire pit." As we moved back toward the campsite, I felt a chill run down my spine. The shadows seemed to stretch and contort, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone. When we reached the clearing, I set the herbs down and took a deep breath. "Okay, what's next?" Sarah opened the diary, her eyes scanning the pages. "We need to create a circle, and then we can start the incantation." "An incantation?" Chris said skeptically. "What if it just angers the spirit more? Then we have to take that risk," I replied. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to come for us." Sarah nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Let's do this, together." As we began to arrange the herbs in a circle, I felt the air grow colder. The fire flickered, casting ominous shadows around us. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. Sarah and Chris nodded, and we stood together, hands clasped in a circle. "We can do this," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. As we began to speak the words from the diary, the shadows around us shifted, swirling as if alive. My heart raced, and I could feel the weight of the spirit's gaze upon us. "Almas perdidas, almas vingativas." The words echoed in the stillness, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath us. The air cracked, the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the forest as we stood in a circle around the flickering fire. The tension was palpable, each of us weighed down by the shadows of our fears and the dark secrets we had kept buried. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat that mirrored the chaos in my mind. The air was thick with an impending sense of doom, a feeling that something unspeakable was about to occur. "Guys, we need to do this," I said, my voice trembling, yet firm. "We need to finish what we started. If we don't, who knows what will happen. We've already lost Jake." The mention of his name made the group flinch. Jake was still missing, vanishing into the night like so many others before him. "Are you sure about this, Mike?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes wide with fear. "What if it's all a trap? What if the spirit is just using us to get what it wants?" "I don't know," I snapped, frustration bubbling over. "But we can't just sit here and do nothing. The longer we wait, the closer we get to becoming its next victims." Chris, still shaken from his encounter in the cave, stood to my right, his face pale and drawn. I can't help but think about what I saw. The shadow, it's not just a shadow. It's alive and it's angry. We need to confront it, but I don't know how. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "What if we're just feeding it by trying to communicate? Then we'll have to take that risk," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We have to face it head on. We can't let fear control us." The flames danced wildly, casting flickering shadows that seemed to reach for us, as if the fire itself was trying to protect us from the encroaching darkness. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it whispers that sent chills down my spine. I could feel the shadows creeping closer, the essence of the forest wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. As we gathered our courage, I decided to step forward, my heart racing. "I'll do it," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I'll be the offering." A collective gasp echoed around the circle, and Sarah's face paled further. "Mike, no, you can't be serious." She reached out to grab my arm, her grip tight with desperation. "You don't know what it will do to you. I have to," I insisted, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I can feel it, Sarah. This is the only way to end this nightmare. We can't keep running from our past. I need to do this for Jake, for all of us." Chris looked between us, his expression a mix of fear and admiration. "You're willing to sacrifice yourself? Just like that?" His voice trembled, as if he couldn't comprehend the gravity of my decision. "It's not just that," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "There's something I haven't told you guys. Something important." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. My family, they were involved in the mining accident. They were the ones who caused it. The revelation hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and oppressive. Sarah's mouth dropped open, and Chris's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "When I was a kid, I heard stories. Stories about how my grandfather was part of the crew that ignored the warnings. They didn't care about the miners. They just wanted to make money. And when the cave-in happened, they covered it up. They let the families believe the miners had simply vanished." I swallowed hard, tears brimming in my eyes. I never wanted to believe it, but it's the truth. The spirit is tied to that tragedy, and if I confess, maybe it will set them free. Maybe it will end this cycle of vengeance. Silence fell over the group, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the distant rustle of leaves. I could see the conflict in Sarah's eyes, the fear mixing with a sense of understanding. "Mike, you can't just throw yourself into this. There has to be another way," she pleaded, desperation lacing her words. "There isn't time," I replied, my voice breaking. "The longer we wait, the stronger the spirit becomes. If I do this, maybe it will listen. Maybe it will understand." In that moment, the shadows around us thickened, swirling with a life of their own. The air grew colder, and I could hear the whispers again, more distinct now, filling my mind with dread. "Almas perdidas, almas vingativas." The words echoed, haunting and ominous. Chris stepped back, his eyes darting around frantically. "It's here. It's coming." Fear laced his voice, and I could see the terror etched into his features. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in my resolve. We have to do this together. I can't face it alone. I turned to Sarah, my heart aching at the thought of leaving her behind. You have to trust me. We have to face this together, or we'll all be lost. With a shaky nod, Sarah stepped closer, her eyes fierce. Okay, we'll do it. But you have to promise me one thing: you'll fight. You won't let it take you without a fight. I promise, I whispered, my heart swelling with determination. We'll face it together. The shadows coalesced into a form that was both familiar and terrifying. The Guardia das Almas Perdidas emerged, its presence suffocating, an overwhelming force of darkness that wrapped around us like a noose. Its voice roared through the night. Almas Perdidas, Almas Vingativas. Listen to me, I shouted, stepping forward. I know why you're angry. I know what happened to you and the others. It was wrong. It was a crime. My family, we were part of it. We abandoned you and your brothers in that mine. As the words left my lips, the shadow hesitated, its form flickering as if caught between rage and recognition. Almas Perdidas, please, I continued, my voice rising above the chaos. I'm here to make amends, to tell the truth. You have to let them go. They deserve peace. The air crackled with energy, the shadows swirling violently around us. I could feel the weight of the spirit's anger, its pain, and its desperation pushing against me. You think your words can cleanse the sins of your ancestors? It hissed, the voice echoing like thunder. I don't know if they can, I replied, my heart racing, but I'm willing to face the consequences. I'm ready to take responsibility for what was done. Please, just let them go. The shadows roared, and the wind howled, drowning out my voice as it pushed back, testing my resolve. I could feel my friends next to me, their fear palpable, yet their presence grounding me as we faced the storm together. Mike, Sarah shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Don't let it take you. Fight back. I nodded, the weight of her words igniting a fire within me. I won't give in, I screamed, channeling every ounce of strength I had. I'm here. I'm not afraid. Suddenly, the shadows lunged at me, tendrils of darkness wrapping around my body, pulling me into their depths. I gasped, the cold seeping into my bones, but I held onto my resolve. You're not taking me. I won't let you. In that moment, I felt a surge of power, a connection to the souls trapped within the darkness. You deserve to be free, I cried out, tears streaming down my face. I'm sorry for what was done to you. You don't have to suffer anymore. The shadow hesitated again, the tendrils loosening their grip as if caught in my words. Almas Perdidas, it echoed, a mournful wail that resonated deep within my soul. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. You can be free. You have to let go of your anger. You don't have to haunt us any longer. The shadows flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw the faces of the miners, their eyes filled with pain and sorrow. Almas Perdidas, they whispered, their voices a chorus of grief. Let me help you, I shouted, my voice breaking. I'll carry your story. I'll make sure everyone knows what happened. You won't be forgotten. The darkness roared, a cacophony of anguish, and I felt the weight of their pain pressing down on me, threatening to crush me. But I stood my ground, my friends beside me, their presence a steadying force. Mike, Sarah shouted again, her voice laced with fear. It's too strong. We need to get out of here. No, I cried, fighting against the shadows. We can't leave, not yet. I won't abandon them again. In that moment, the Guardio unleashed a wave of fury, and the shadows surged forward, engulfing me completely. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, my vision blurring as despair washed over me. Mike,